All right, let's dive into this explainer. We're going to untangle what is honestly one of the most chaotic, fascinating internet reactions to a massive economic milestone. When one person's wealth suddenly skyrockets to totally unprecedented levels, it creates this incredible collision. We are talking about a completely unique intersection here between high-stakes global finance, fierce political debate, and, well, a guy sitting in his bedroom playing video games. We're going to see exactly how these vastly different corners of society digest and debate the whole concept of extreme wealth. To make sense of all of this, we're breaking this wild stream of consciousness broadcast down into 5 clear topics. We'll hit the first trillionaire, the streamer's perspective, the political clash, liquid wealth versus equity, and finish up with automation and UBI. Let's get right into it. So, part 1, the first trillionaire. We are starting right at the catalyst that kicked off this entire internet frenzy. $1.1 trillion. According to the broadcast we're looking at, Elon Musk's net worth reportedly shot up to this absolutely staggering figure. I mean, that number is so large it almost loses its meaning, right? It completely shatters previous financial records and puts him in an economic class entirely of his own. To even conceptualize $1 trillion is incredibly difficult for the human brain, which is exactly why the sheer scale of this milestone sent immediate shockwaves across the internet. It wasn't just a business headline. It prompted these intense, immediate reactions from politicians, everyday citizens, and massive online content creators who usually stick to completely different topics. Now, the streamer we're following noted that this massive jump was triggered by a SpaceX IPO, which stands for Initial Public Offering. For anyone who doesn't track the markets every day, an IPO is just when a private company first offers its shares to the public. And in this specific case, it successfully raised a jaw-dropping $75 billion. When a company with this much hype opens up, the valuation spikes can be pretty wild. The stock began trading around $168 per share. But what's really fascinating here is the streamer's own surprisingly detailed market prediction. Despite being a huge supporter of the company, he expects a short-term reality check. He predicts a dip down to somewhere around $120 to $135 as the initial hype fades, before the stock eventually climbs up to $300 once the company hits its next major technological milestones, like, returning humans to the moon. Moving on to part 2, the streamer's perspective. To really get why the internet reacted the way it did, we have to look through the highly unique lens of the broadcaster breaking this down. This guy have a worldview that is, well, drastically different from your traditional Wall Street financial analyst. He openly views traditional education and reading books as, frankly, a boring chore, something to be actively avoided. Instead, playing video games is his absolute ultimate priority in life. He unapologetically admits to totally ignoring traditional academics growing up, completely preferring to spend hours upon hours deep in complex virtual economies, like the ones you'd find in games like Path of Exile. This background sets the stage for a very specific, fiercely independent framework through which he views the world. He isn't filtering economic news through a corporate lens, he's filtering it through the lens of a highly engaged internet native. In fact, his core philosophy essentially boils down to this one singular goal: to just be left alone to play games with as few distractions as possible. It's a mindset that values ultimate personal autonomy above almost anything else. When you understand that this is his driving force, his commentary on the news makes total sense. He evaluates the news of trillionaires, taxes, and government overreach based entirely on how it impacts his ability to maintain that independence. If an economic policy or a political movement threatens to complicate his life or introduce unwanted distractions, he's against it. It's actually a radically transparent way of analyzing current events. Which brings us to part 3, the political clash. Because, obviously, an economic milestone this massive didn't just stay quietly contained in gaming circles. We are looking at 2 fundamentally opposed views here that clashed the second this news broke. On one side, progressive politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren viewed this unprecedented milestone as a massive red flag for society. They argue that billionaires are the product of a rigged economy and a deeply flawed tax code, and they demand systemic changes like aggressive wealth taxes to level the playing field. On the flip side, we have the tech industry perspective, which is fiercely defended by the streamer. This side argues that tech billionaires are crucial innovators. In their view, they aren't hoarding resources. They are actively creating jobs, building world-changing products like electric cars and reusable rockets, and advancing overall human progress. It is a fundamental battle between viewing extreme wealth as a systemic failure versus viewing it as the ultimate reward for pushing humanity forward. To really drive her point home to her political base, Elizabeth Warren uses this incredible sense of scale. She points out that a typical American household would have to work more than 11 million years just to reach $1 trillion in wealth. I mean, let that sink in for a second. 11 million years of standard labor just to equal the net worth of one individual. She uses this dramatic, almost incomprehensible framing to argue that the system is fundamentally broken and severely skewed to reward executives over everyday workers. It's a very powerful rhetorical tool designed to build momentum for sweeping tax reform. But the streamer pushes back fiercely against this political rhetoric. He argues that politicians often use these extreme wealth topics mostly just to pander for votes, without holding true principled stances. For instance, he claims Warren is hypocritical for not heavily endorsing Bernie Sanders, who also built his campaign around wealth taxes back when he actually needed the momentum in past primary elections. Furthermore, the streamer shifts the conversation entirely. He argues that everyday citizens face much more real, daily disruption from the bottom 1% of the population, citing issues like property crime and street harassment than they ever do from the top 1% of wealth holders. It's a starkly different diagnosis of society's daily problems, totally redirecting the focus away from billionaire executives and onto local, immediate quality of life issues. That brings us to part 4, liquid wealth versus equity. This gets to a massive disconnect in how the general public actually understands this trillion-dollar milestone. It all really boils down to the concept of equity. Equity represents ownership via shares in a company, rather than immediately spendable cash sitting in a bank account. The streamer points out that a severe lack of basic financial literacy in the general public leads to a completely skewed view of what net worth actually means. He literally jokes that a massive chunk of the population couldn't even solve a basic algebra problem like 3 plus 2x equals 5. And his point is, if you can't do basic middle school math, you're absolutely going to fail to understand complex corporate valuations and how billionaires actually hold their wealth. He uses this highly visual, cartoonish metaphor to drive this home. The public perception basically pictures a Mr. Krabs vault from SpongeBob. People literally think a trillionaire has a giant physical room piled high with gold coins and cash that they're just selfishly refusing to share. But the economic reality is entirely different. This wealth is almost completely tied up in stock equity. Its value fluctuates wildly with market forces day to day. If a CEO actually attempted to liquidate or sell off massive amounts of their stock all at once just to give that money away, they would flood the market and crash the price of the stock entirely, wiping out the value. It's not liquid money sitting in a checking account, it's the on-paper value of the companies they built. To back up his defense of the tech industry, he leans on the idea that a rising tide floats all boats. The creation of a trillionaire didn't happen in a total vacuum. It generated massive wealth for thousands of everyday workers at the exact same time. Reports indicate that the SpaceX IPO alone is estimated to have created 4,000 new millionaires among regular employees. We're talking about engineers, contractors, and welders who held company equity and were rewarded for their hard work. He argues this proves that these massive valuations actively enrich the broader workforce rather than just isolating wealth at the very top of the corporate ladder. And finally, part 5, automation and UBI. This is where all this fierce debate leads us to a surprisingly shared vision of the future. Believe it or not, both tech leaders like Elon Musk and the streamer actually foresee the exact same timeline for our future, and it involves a complete restructuring of society. Step 1. Extreme automation and artificial intelligence eventually replace traditional human labor almost entirely. Step 2. Because robotics are so wildly efficient and, hey, they don't require salaries or sleep, the output of goods and services will far exceed the money supply, causing massive deflation. The cost to produce things drops near zero, so goods become incredibly cheap. Step 3. Because traditional jobs are largely gone, a universal basic income, or UBI, becomes absolutely necessary to sustain the population. UBI is basically a system where the government provides every citizen with a recurring cash payment to cover their basic needs. It's a vision of a future where humans are given baseline incomes to live their lives, while robots and AI handle all the heavy lifting in production. So as we wrap up this explainer, we've got to ask, will extreme wealth and hyper-automation eventually force society into adopting universal basic income? Are these race to $1 trillion companies actually paving the inevitable road to a society where human labor is entirely obsolete? It's a profound, maybe even a little unsettling thought to leave you with as you consider the massive real-world impact lurking just behind these financial headlines. Thanks so much for diving into this with me.